Everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio TV live stream. And wow, I am super pumped about today's show. We're going to be talking to Bradbury Cort Lindahl, aka Cort Lindahl, and we're going to get into lays, lines, axis mundi, all sorts of geomancy today. Super excited about today's author and researcher, a super researcher that he is too. Of course, his books are The Sacred Towers of the Axis Mundi, True History Revealed, and The Sacred Towers of the Axis Mundi. So if you want to follow along with today's author, you can also go to survivalcell.blogspot.com and check out his blog there. It's fun packed with lots of super exciting material. Of course, I am joined by my Heather co-host today, Heather Osborn. Hi Heather, are you with me?
Hi James, I'm here. It's great to be here.
Wow, you excited today, Heather?
I am. I'm really interested in what Cort has to say.
Wow, I can't wait. So let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Cort, are you with us on the call?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. And I'm excited to tell everybody about what I've been finding out lately.
Awesome, Cort. You know, we connected a while back through a mutual friend and through research on YouTube. It's funny how the thing happens. And funny enough, yourself and Heather also write for the same magazine, so it's a small world out there. Cort, I guess tell the little people, we're going to look at some of the presentations and material that you have in a little bit, but I guess tell people how you got into geomancy. What's the attraction? I know it's obviously mysterious and intriguing, but how come you picked up the research, Cort?
Well, when I was in college, I studied geography and archaeology and art history. So about 7 years ago, I got injured on the job, and I decided to take some of the time I had to try to look into some strange things I had thought about before. I went to high school near Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, where the Octagonal Powder magazine is located. And I always thought that was a strange structure and that there had to be more to why they would make it that shape and place it so prominently in a linear array of architecture like the National Mall in Washington, D.C. But so eventually I forgot about that, and then I came to the point where I had time to actually look. And what I found was a legacy of a value of the octagonal structure to create a datum or geodetic structure on the Earth that was used to measure the Earth and also measure time, and to also establish a prime meridian like we see in Greenwich, England, and the famous Paris meridian that we all know from the movie The Da Vinci Code and French history. So that led me to the Tower of the Winds in Athens, Greece, which is kind of the archetype of the more modern version of this structure. The Egyptians seem to practice this as well, and Mesopotamian cultures and probably the Indus River civilizations in India as well had developed some form of this, but we see it getting a little more refined in the Tower of the Winds because they had a clepsydra, or water clock, in the Tower of the Winds that worked off of steady water pressure, and this enabled them to fix longitude accurately and the shape of the Earth more accurately, I feel, for the first time, although a lot of people don't think this was possible till later. So we see the whole progression of this being adapted by Roman rulers, and we see especially Constantine the Great having built 4 octagonal structures. And among them, little known to many people, I believe that Constantine built an octagonal structure on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and was buried beneath it.
Cort, it's almost like every group out there, fraternity group, order, religious or otherwise, or every episode in history revolves around certain sacred landscapes in a geodetic sense. It's almost nearly every part of history you look at, you could say there's some sort of geomancy going on. It's like it's a secret ancient philosophy that just keeps getting carried down through the ages. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but also not to be overlooked, or the way the same powerful entities legally described their own property was tied into this. So there is a practical side of it too, as well as you see, like all the beliefs you're referring to being part of their faith, and all the tenets of geomancy or even establishing an axis mundi, and the area that it defines is known as a templum, was all involved in the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
And during all of these more ancient times in history, you see a propensity for them to absorb hyper intelligent people and search them out and recruit them into these priesthoods. So it's only natural that these people would be the ones smart enough to figure out astronomy, timekeeping, mapping the world, and other technical things like that that would be very advanced for that age. So yeah, there is we see Washington, D.C., all the speculation there as to what the shapes in the streets mean. And part of what I think a lot of this means is it's a tool that's meant to teach you something. So you're almost, once you become curious about these kind of things, it's almost as if you're sent on a kind of grail quest yourself.
It's like you're sucked into a learning curve. You're sucked into this angles and math and trigonometry and encoding information and the occult.
Right. And there's several almost veils you need to pierce on the way to kind of see the more practical side of it, because I think in the media, and I don't discount all of that, that's very important to understand too. I'm just seeing it as a geographer and cartographer, and there are those aspects there. But you can also see true history revealed by the people involved in the construction of these structures, and things that happened that weren't part of the recorded history that may be revealed, such as what I was speaking of with regard to Constantine on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, and let's get into that in a moment. There's so many places I could pick, Cort. I mean, and I love what you do. You know that anyway. We collaborated a little bit a long time ago, and great to finally get you on the show. Sorry I've been so slow, but I mean, you got places.
It's okay.
You got places like Astana, and I know we talked about Kazakhstan before, but look at what's going on in Kazakhstan and Astana. I mean, and then I guess there's like the Mecca Center. You got Astana there. You're pulling it up now. Let me just switch over as well. Astana is just a mind-blowing example of what's going on with this material.
Right. It is. It's amazing. They added the phoenix bird there recently, or at about the time we were talking to each other a few years back. But what you're seeing, it's kind of a linear array.
Can you click on that middle image there, and make that bigger there for the audience, and then
this one I have that one already. Let's see.
Oh, yeah. Any one of those there, I think. Maybe make that bigger.
Did it come up?
Not yet. No.
Well, I'm seeing it on my screen, but
okay. No, it looks very small. Anyway, for the moment, I mean, you can see the lines. I mean, who designed this place? Was this not an English guy did this?
Right. Some of the things I read about that, I kind of looked at Astana and then moved on to other things. A lot of other people were looking at it, and I thought they would find things out about it too, and I could reference that. But what I found was the whole linear array of Astana points to Basilica San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. Mm-hmm. And this is another structure that's related to the same kind of millennial themes and the same kind of royalty, not in Astana, obviously, but they're emulating that just like we did in Washington, D.C. and other places in the United States. So there was a large Eastern European population that did immigrate to Astana, and they kind of are the ones behind the, from what I can see, the kind of Masonic themes that you see in the linear array there. Yeah. Including the pyramid, obviously.
Mm-hmm. The pyramid, the lines, the grid pattern, geometry. It's just I mean, if you want to go to Google Earth and look at something cool and interesting, just go into Astana and just look at this place from Google Earth. It's incredible. It really is.
All right. It's the cutting edge of that art today, I would say. It is quite spectacular. And also, one of the facets of the Great Pyramid of Giza creates an azimuth that comes very close, I think within 6 miles of this linear array as well.
I mean, yeah.
So it's interesting that the pyramid's there.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you take example, then go to Giza. again, it's not just a modern. I mean, Astana is a great modern example, but if you look at many ancient cities, there's a grid plan in place, and sometimes they almost imply a Pythagorean or a geodetic knowledge of the earth. I mean, I just came back from Graham Hancock's book launch, as we were saying before the show. And one of the fascinating things in his new book, Magicians of the Gods, is that he talks about the city of Haran, and that the latitude that it's on beckons the angle of a 3-4-5 Pythagorean triangle. And I know Graham goes on about the layout, and many people do, about the Giza Plateau as well. So it's like these ancient cities. Maybe we can go to the Dome of the Rock as well, Cort, if you want to pull that up. It's a very ancient notion. I think even the Babylonians go back to this. They were the first ones to start encoding this, what some people call this gematria, the encoding of knowledge within.
This speaks to kind of the mystery quest that I was talking about later that you might be sent on, that I think that these people thought it would be better to encode these things in it because they realized it was hard to teach this to everyone themselves during the time in which they lived. So it relates to the concept of the pillars of Boaz and Yakin in masonry, where all the concepts of science and math were inscribed on those to survive. Even into the modern day, we see places like the Georgia Guidestones and the star chart at Hoover Dam.
And Boaz and Yakim, that's referring to the inner world and the exterior world, isn't that correct?
Yes, but that's what they also call the ceremonial pillars in the Masonic Hall, and those are featured in the Book of Enoch as well as having mathematics and geometrical concepts inscribed on them in order to survive a catastrophe.
You know, I was just talking about the Boaz and Yakim pillars at Avebury Stone Circle. There's a Masonic Hall or churchyard, and I don't know what it is. It's a multitude of functional building, but it's just right beside the Avebury. It's built on the grounds of Avebury's Henge in Wiltshire. But yeah,
interesting.
I find that
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I find that, just to say, and I'm going to bring in, I find that at an awful lot of megalithic sites. You look at Doathhenge in Ireland, the second biggest henge in Ireland, as well as the Giant's Ring henge in Belfast, Ireland's biggest henge. There's Masonic halls right beside them. It seems to be that these guys knew something about these geodetic sacred places, Cort.
I agree. They appreciate the geometry and the mathematics and the astronomy that fit with all of the lore of astrology that they value. We're just talking about the Book of Enoch. That's valued in Masonry to a large degree. And I mean, even the Book of Enoch is tied up in this whole story with the Debati brothers, who their family is behind the Great Cyclic Cross of Hendaye. And James Bruce, the descendant of Robert the Bruce that went to Ethiopia, and he brought back 3 ancient copies of the Book of Enoch to Europe, and he was one of the first people to ever do this. So they had an ancient copy to compare the modern version of the story to. And you see like tenets of the Book of Enoch and what James Bruce did in the Kirkwall scroll. Which is an enigmatic scroll in Scotland as well. At least that's my theory. A lot of people think it's much older, but I think elements of the scroll refer to James Bruce, and they even include the kind of Enochian script that was included in the books that he brought back. And really, one just quick, real funny story about James Bruce was how he was one of the first to see the Keber Nagast, or the Ethiopian Book of Kings, and he actually found a king named Bruce, B-R-U-S, that lived 97 years before Christ in Ethiopia.
Wow. Wow.
So he had kind of a personal revelation, or he speculated how he might be related to that. And indeed, if you look at the Declaration of Arbroath of the Scottish nobility at the time of Robert the Bruce, they claimed direct descent from Egypt and Scythia.
I'm going to bring Heather in at this point. Heather, jump in before Cort takes us on another journey.
No, that's really fascinating for me because Robert the Bruce is one of my areas of specialties for research, and I'm a descendant of Robert the Bruce also. So you're just giving me some helpful information there, Cort. One of the interesting things, so thank you. One of the interesting things when we look at these diagrams in front of us, but also one of the things you emphasize early on in your book, Axis Mundi, is the issue of octagons, and that this is an association that we see in America also that shows early Templar visitation in America. Can you talk about that a little bit and the structures that are related to the octagons?
Certainly, and that's really just one thing I've been writing about in my next book that's coming up, The Lost Treasures of the Sacred Meridians. And really, the conclusion I'm coming to is vastly different than anything you're seeing on TV or in the popular notions of what went on with that. It does indeed indicate that people came here a lot earlier, but what I'm seeing is a great Norman influence from southern Italy in the form of Frederick II and the subsequent kings of Naples, the Anjou family. And all of these families descended from the Hauteville family of Normandy. And you'll see it's really interesting because through a whole string of octagons, two of which were built by Frederick II, another at Heidelberg Castle where Prince Rupert of the Rhine grew up, and he was the first governor of the Hudson's Bay Company, all point to the site of the International Peace Garden on the border of the United States and Canada, where there's another octagon. And what I found is that this was a point that was used as an axis or datum and place from which to measure, that even points to the Kensington runestone, the site of another runestone, and it also is on the same latitude as another pillar that seems to be a claim marker for the Hudson's Bay Company.
Wow.
So via an examination of all of this, I think as early as Frederick II, who really founded the Hanseatic League of the Baltic Rim, and he was more aligned with the Teutonic Knights than the Knights Templar. In fact, he kicked the Knights Templar out of Sicily and had an adversarial relationship with them, so they had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. He was, though, allied with the Scottish. So their information, their knowledge of this could have come from Frederick II's Magi, Michael Scott, who was one of the most brilliant geometricians of the era, who even wrote a book called Spherae about spherical geometry. So what I found are these are the people who came. And it's not very clear how to what degree they were able to take advantage of their knowledge of the new continent. It even looks as though Columbus learned of this information via these same Norman families. So I don't think it was till the Hudson's Bay Company in the late 1600s when they were actually able to take advantage of it in any appreciable way. But people did come and explore earlier.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned it. Well, you mentioned the Kensington Runestone. I'll have to mention Scott Walter at this point. He is coming on next month, but it wasn't until Scott Walter's work that I found the parallel between the Newport Tower and Mellifont Abbey in Ireland. And it just beckons this octagonal material that you're talking about. So maybe you can draw a reference to that.
Sure. Well, the appreciation from the octagon starts kind of with the eight-pointed star of Ishtar and kind of works its way into Christian mythology through the concept of the Beatitudes, which are eight different angels and sayings that were valued highly by the Knights of Malta, for instance. And really, we see in the Knights of Malta, their organizational structure included regional divisions known as languas, such as the name of the Languedoc of France, and then their commanderies, like the Knights Templar had, what were called priories. So you see a lot more of these instances that traditionally people are kind of applying to what the Knights Templar did. I'm finding the Knights of Malta did, or the Knights of Santiago, or possibly even the Knights of Calatrava, who were also created by the Cistercian order just as the Knights Templar were. So there's lots of things going on here. I mean, we're seeing people, I think just identifying the Templars with having done things like put the Kensington stone there, and there's a lot more evidence to suggest other orders and other royal interests were behind it than the Knights Templar.
Sure. Wow. You know, the idea of this axis, I mean, I remember going through school in history for the Rome-Berlin axis from the Nazis, and were teaming up with Mussolini, and they developed this idea of the Rome-Berlin axis. And this seems to be an idea that's been used by rulers right up into modern times, where you create this axis, whether that's going in several directions or just between Rome and Berlin, or the idea of an axis, and that's the central unit of power. Is this to embody the people with a philosophy that you're giving them like this? Are you selling these people a philosophy, or are we talking about an actual axis that's tapping into energies, Cort?
Well, I think a really, really good modern example of what you're talking about is the Burning Man Arts Festival that's held in the desert each year in Nevada. Mm-hmm. I mean, they even call the road around the central port of the event the Esplanade, which is an open area associated with an axis mundi. All the directional attributes of the design of it are referred to in time-based increments. So I've spoken to the originators of the plan of the event, and they think I'm crazy. But they've really created a little town in the middle of the desert. Really, this speaks to the concept that I always come back to, is if you create it, they will come.
Yeah, like the
I mean,
baseball
all of these
movie.
people, they've created an entire culture in the middle of the desert with all of these art installations, with the, a veneration of the Wicker Man rite in the middle of it. The entire event is reminiscent of the Eleusinian Mysteries, where everybody probably were dosed with hallucinogenic honey and let loose in an enclosed area, and they had to swear not to tell what went on. And
Sure.
that reminds me of a Grateful Dead concert, kind of. So there are aspects to it that maybe they didn't even plan into the event, where it evolves that way and gains this kind of culture where people identify with it or not. But as far as any real energy, I think that's very possible too.
It's almost talismanic, though, or powerful in a talismanic way.
Right. I mean, even it's so funny because the shape of Burning Man points to Santiago de Compostela.
Wow.
And this is something that in Mystery of the Cathedrals of Fulcanelli, all the alchemical lore of medieval Europe, the Pilgrim's Path was an initiate's path as well. And that this place happens to point there. And it transects right over Minerva Peak in Nevada on the way. So even though they claim it's not planned, it gains some of these tenets. And I think if it was planned, I wouldn't be told anyway. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
Maybe you can bring in the Vatican at this point, pull up a picture or two just for the audience again, Cort, because we have spiritual groups or religious groups, whatever you want to call them. Some people will call them religious, and some people, there's a difference between religion and spirituality, obviously, but are they tapping into these energy or these centers or sacred landscapes because of they want to control people? They want to either tap into this spiritual energy for the purpose of, I'm trying to be tactful here for the religious audience, but perhaps
to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, is that the idea? Is that the idea to? Let me see. Can I pull up the screen here?
Well, whether it's a physical thing or not, I think that happens. Just like we said there at Burning Man, people were drawn to it even with no overtones like that being presented to them necessarily. So when you add a whole overlay of a organization like the Catholic Church, for instance, or the United States of America in Washington, D.C., it definitely can gain those kind of things where people will blindly adhere to it without even really understanding what it is somehow. And here, what I'm showing on the screen now, you can see one of the hidden ways. You can see the array of the obelisk in the Windrose.
I can't see it. I think your screen is frozen at the moment.
Okay. Well, the array at the Vatican has Windrose markers around the obelisk that point to places. Right, and one of them points right to the Dome of the Rock, and the facet of that structure seems to have been oriented to point right back. And here you think, well, this is supposed to be a Muslim structure. Why would they do that? So this fits my entire theory here of Constantine. There are historians from the 19th century sources I have saying it was built by Constantine. You have other ones saying that he built an octagon and it was demolished and they used the pieces of it again to build the Dome of the Rock at the time when they say it was in the 7th century. But there's even records of Justinian II sending artists and engineers to help the Caliph of Jerusalem build the Dome of the Rock. So there's a lot of imperial manipulation and things like that that could indicate something else is going on there. I mean, in addition to that, this octagonal structure is just not a Muslim form of architecture. You have a clear lineage of Roman and Byzantine rulers. Charlemagne built a copy of the Dome of the Rock at Aachen Cathedral. So the Dome of the Rock's lineage is more imperial Roman than any kind of Muslim form of architecture. Indeed, I don't think there is even another Muslim octagonal structure in the world that was built around this time. So many architectural historians point to the Dome of the Rock as an oddity that really can't be explained away. Even the architectural elements are pointed to, the actual columns and cross members and everything are pointed to as being Byzantine in design.
Mind-blowing. Heather,
so there's some hidden... There's some hidden
another interesting thing, speaking of Burning Man, is the Bohemian Grove, which, I wasn't aware of those alignments that you brought up with the magic squares, because I've always, had a lot of trepidation about what goes on there. But it's really quite frightening, the possibility of harnessing that kind of energy. If you could talk a little bit about the alignments there and what goes on.
Right. I haven't found too much that actually points to there, but the Bohemian Grove is oriented on the exact 123rd degree of longitude, which is kind of interesting. The whole area has an interesting history with the Order of Odd Fellows and other secret societies that held similar meetings there. So one of the things we're seeing there is a combination of all these different groups using that place for their rituals and initiations and things like that as well. But the Burning Man, a lot of people point to it as being similar to the Bohemian Grove. And that's possible. I mean, a lot of people bring items to throw into the Burning Man that's similar to the cremation of care ceremony at Bohemian Grove. I'm not so sure that for instance, the Bohemian Grove is as insidious as it's been presented to us by Alex Jones or other people. It's kind of like a big college fraternity on steroids with people who do have real power. So that is more of what I would fear from it than any real occult energy or force or anything like that. But also, I think they like to have those concepts identified with them. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of stuff about pirates lately. I mean, the whole Masonic concept of having the skull and bones to look at to contemplate your mortality, to show you that life is only so short. You only have so much time on the earth that, when the pirates ran the Jolly Roger up, they were saying, you better contemplate your mortality right now.
Wow.
and behave accordingly in a way. So there are Masonic connections to things like that, and you always do see those connections. So it's like a motorcycle gang. If you see the skulls and the stuff like that, you want to stay away. So maybe it's kind of a way of telling people don't come here as well.
I know that the German Templars are the Knights of Malta, the black one, the guys with the black cross, the black Masonic cross. They're like a spin-off of the Knights of Malta. But I know these guys, they have the skull and bones in their ideology as well. But I wasn't aware it was because of their mortality. I didn't know that.
Right, and that organization also led to the Skull and Bones organization there at Yale University that's famous for President Bush being a member and John Kerry and other people. So that did derive in Germany.
Yeah,
The
well,
Skull
it
and
was
Bones
in
there.
Vienna, in the city of Vienna, that I was doing the whole tour of the city, and from Beethoven to everything else, and he was a Mason as well. But the whole city is just regalia of Masonic emblems, and heavily focused on that German wing. With the black
Right, and I
cross.
think people forget too. The Skull and Bones symbol is heavily associated with Robert the Bruce, and a lot of people don't know this either. That when Sir James Douglas, now he was named for Santiago, his uncle James Stuart, the fifth Earl of Stuart, was the first person really to be named in the English line of kings to be James, and that was his uncle. So he actually took Robert the Bruce's heart to Santiago de Compostela.
Wow.
Prior to the Battle of Teba, where the famous story about him taking the heart into battle, which I think is a total fairy tale, and these men survived and did other things. But with regard to the Skull and Bones, you have the Knight Moir, or this is the Muir family, actually including the Skull and Bones on their family arms, because he was one of the knights that returned the remains of the missing knights of Teba to Scotland. So after that, and this is at about 1330, it was adapted as a part of his family arms, as well as the All-Seeing Eye. So the Moir family, or the Muir family, has two really well-entrenched Masonic symbols in their arms before Masonry existed.
Fascinating. Heather?
Do you think that these early explorations by the Knights Templar in America then led to the founding of Jamestown and colonial Williamsburg then with the alignments? Because you mentioned very specific alignments there. And I used to live in Virginia, actually, so I found that really fascinating, these alignments that you talk about.
Yes, I think even the powder magazine in Williamsburg is how Thomas Jefferson was initiated into all of these mysteries. So, as I was referring to before, there's signs that even Roman rulers and Visigothic rulers may have known about North America. It's possible the octagon of Constantine's in Constantinople points to the powder magazine in Williamsburg and crosses Oak Island all in one line. So these are possibly places where earlier people had come and collected star logs or ephemeris, thus making it an axis. So if they had collected star logs from where the powder magazine is, for instance, they could compare it to the site of the Vatican or anywhere else where a star log had been collected. So I think people really weren't able to, as I was saying, to take advantage of it until later. So even the date range that Scott Wolter has on the Kensington runestone is around that time, but I think it was a little bit earlier than that people had came and collected a star log from where the International Peace Garden is. So as time progressed, the first families of Virginia and Pennsylvania and New England all included members who were privy to this information via the Stuart family. And even the first colonial governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, who built the powder magazine, is directly descendant from Robert the Bruce, and built this structure that points to the International Peace Garden. And not only does it point there, but at the Peace Garden, they've constructed a Masonic compass and square-shaped building that points back to the powder magazine. And I'll bring some pictures of that up. But that's incredible, because that, to me, shows knowledge of what I'm talking about on the part of the people who manage the Peace Garden now. So that's a pretty incredible association.
It's just mind-blowing with the fact that you can just go
There, can you see those? Look at those two pictures. Those two buildings point at each other. Mm-hmm. Built by the same family.
Wow.
The Stuart family indirectly is behind the establishment of the International Peace Garden as well in 1932. The Eaton family, who own a department store chain in Canada, were on the board of directors, and they are Stuarts.
Wow. What I like about what you do, Cort, is it's not just the aerial footage or the Google Earth stuff. Is you have the historical concepts and the historical philosophy to back all this up as well. And I think that's the level of detail I want to draw attention to in what you do. And of course, you get that all in the books too. And it's not just imagery that we're looking at here. It's the whole philosophy that goes with this stuff.
Yes, it's amazing too when you find, you know, structures like this and then go look into the background of who built them and find really quickly that the same families and people were behind lots of them. I mean, and this does start at the Vatican. We know Constantine built the old St. Peter's there, and the whole new array of the Vatican points right to the royal district of Constantinople, where they had another, his son and grandson had another Egyptian obelisk erected there. So it's all a plan. And sometimes what's really interesting, it's hard to discern because these things are carried out in different eras at different times. They might collect a star log somewhere, yet not add a tower or structure there for another 100 years.
Wow.
And I think that's the case at the Newport Tower in Rhode Island there, where there's a lot of debate about when that was built.
It amazes me. I've been to Rome, and when you walk around the courtyard of the Vatican there, and mostly all of the city anyway, but especially around the Vatican and St. Peter's Basilica, the geometric plan of the city. Many people walk around that city oblivious to all this, Cort. The majority are oblivious to all this. They all walk with their head to the ground, and they're blind to all this material. They really are.
Right, and if you look at Paris and Rome, you can see Washington, D.C. was definitely inspired by the layout of both of those cities. And Rome is incredible, too, because the way they've uncovered a lot of the, ruins there, you can see where different rulers were making different alignments and how some of them allied with each other. And that's really one of the groundbreaking things I've just discovered here in the last week, is that in the alignment of the Forum of Trajan and Julius Caesar, both of those fora are aligned with each other, kind of like a linear park. This is the earlier evolution of what we see at the Peace Garden. At the southern end of this alignment, Emperor Vespasian added the Temple of Peace to this alignment. This Temple of Peace, with the alignment of the Forum of Julius Caesar and Emperor Trajan, points to the International Peace Garden. So at the Temple of Peace is where the menorah was stored that was looted from the temple when Titus sacked the Temple Mount. Wow. So really all of this is inferring that there's something at the International Peace Garden, all told to us in metaphor and suggestion, using symbols in art history, that there's something there very important. And also, the Peace Temple reveals that a library was possibly taken from the Temple Mount as well.
Wow.
Because Emperor Theodosius, the Ostrogothic emperor, built a library there as well, the Peace Library.
Let me switch gears a moment, Cort. Let's say we have groups, surreptitious or not, clandestine or not, whatever, they're encoding all this sacred knowledge from an ancient philosophy that's carried through the centuries from a multitude of groups. Maybe they're trying to reignite an old philosophy that they don't fully understand, but they're taking the sacred geometry and they're encoding it in their structures. It implies that the ancient knowledge, that these guys had knowledge that the earth was not just round, but how to measure it, and they knew what geodesy was. They knew the sacred geometry of the earth. This is what implies that the ancients knew this.
Sure, and not only that, it kind of infers that they knew that the earth could go through catastrophic changes. And that kind of accounts for the millennial themes that you see at many of these structures. Where, again, back to the Georgia Guidestones with the messages there, that's the most obvious kind. But even if you look at Basilica San Vital in Ravenna, who Theodoric had a hand in building, the man I was just talking about, you see the mosaic of Christ Pantocrator there, and he's beardless with short hair, dressed in Byzantine royal purple, but he's holding the 7 seals in his hands. So a lot of this is suggestive of, like the Pillars of Boaz and Yakin. I think a lot of these structures starting after Constantine especially included information like this, and they also included, you start to see a lot of them having sundials, a way to sight the pole star, a way to calculate the equinox, and things like that, that will begin you sort of on this quest of knowledge. That's the same way all science and technology originally developed in the history we do know about.
Wow.
So there are a lot of, even Coral Castle in Florida, I believe is one of these structures. We discussed how the Dome of the Rock and the Vatican point to each other. If you go the exact opposite direction of that alignment, it leads to Coral Castle. So the Dome of the Rock and the Vatican point to Coral Castle in Florida.
Wow.
All in one line. Then if you extend the line to Cozumel Island in Mexico, this is the first place where Spain claimed Mexico. And I found that too, like the Dome of the Rock points to the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. So they're using these structures actually to claim property.
Yeah, a lot of people think that over in Europe that we're a bunch of individual countries, and we're all French and German and Spanish and Dutch and English, Irish, and the whole of Western Europe, is particularly, and a bit of Eastern Europe too, but I mean mostly Western Europe and Central Europe was all done with Masonic orders right through the centuries. I mean, the Spanish Armada were all carrying Templar crosses and gold jewellery. When they went down off the coast of Ireland, they have recovered some of the ships, and they were all carrying Templar crosses. They were all, I mean, most of the European royalty are all heading back to the same family, to the Habsburgs. So people think that it's the Spanish and the French and the Dutch, but I mean, they were all carrying the same philosophy. They were all answerable to the same lineage, if you will, and the same philosophy. So I'd have no problem thinking that the Spanish, when they came to conquer, used a geodetic line. No problem at all thinking that.
Right, and that's true. And then later you see the Masonic factions kind of adapting the same strategy with their secular notions of not making that a factor, where people from different religions could work together to get something done against this kind of vast royal influence that you were referring to. I mean, in some cases, the Masonic factions worked with the royal factions. And then in instances like the formation of the United States and the establishment of a republic in France, we see the opposite.
Wow. Heather, you got to jump in here. This is a super fast show today.
Yeah, I know it is. It's great, though. It's the thing that I keep coming back to with the International Peace Garden, Cort, and maybe you can give us some insights on your perspective on this. With these alignments all leading to this peace garden and the whole concept of international and all these alignments that we've been talking about, so often with alignments we get the nefarious view of it, that it was done for satanic or evil purposes. But it seems to me that what you're uncovering here is something very hopeful. I mean, do you see it from that perspective?
I see that there, but I also see a lot of things that have been done that show that history is different, that just seems to be okay as well. I mean, all of this does infer an alternate scheme of history. If you look at the Peace Garden and the whole scheme of things evolving from Frederick II to Prince Rupert of the Rhine to Frederick the Great of Prussia, this is all involved in the Jacobite movement of the exiled kings of Scotland and England, who played a huge hidden hand in the creation of the United States. I mean, every time there was a Jacobite revolt in Scotland or England, a lot of the refugees would come to America or the Baltic Rim. So you can see the influence of even an intelligence network in colonial America that's composed of these people that have these values. And that's why it's interesting to see later all of these tenants going into places like Washington, D.C., and Thomas Jefferson building his 3 octagons that all point to amazing places like Roslyn Chapel and the Sans Souci estate of Frederick the Great and the King's Knot at Stirling Castle. So Thomas Jefferson is showing you who his allies are and who his influences are and who his allegiance is to. So Frederick the Great, you even see subsequent, you see the monarchy, the King of America, being offered to Bonnie Prince Charlie, a Jacobite exiled king, and Prince Henry of Prussia, Frederick the Great's brother. So there was a big movement to have a royalty in America, and there was kind of factions in the United States that obviously on either side of that issue, and you kind of see the Jacobite faction favoring the monarchy in the United States, and people like Thomas Jefferson and other more John Adams being against that. So there was some intrigue going on in the formation of the Revolution and all the ideals of that too. There's different, and really this is what led to the Civil War, in my opinion, too. The South representing the Jacobites, kind of the landed gentry, and the North representing Protestant-minded people and German immigrants and people from other countries as well.
It's interesting you bring that up, because that was something I was going to ask you about, because I went back to Virginia. I had stuff in storage there over the summer with my husband, Gary. And one of the things that we had realized was, this parallel line that was going through it, and the dividing line between North and South that happens there at Appomattox, where the Civil War ended. So it's interesting, your theory about the Mason-Dixon line, because we were coming to those same kind of conclusions. It was almost like a purposeful division in the United States that was created early on.
That even happens to have the Mason name in it. And really what
exactly.
I found right, that the Mason-Dixon line's the basis for the township and range system, the baseline that Thomas Jefferson had a hand in creating, and really the township and range system ultimately helps you legally describes property using the Fibonacci sequence, because you progressively reduce the sizes of the property to record the middle of it, and it ends up making a kind of a digital spiral, like you see being the template for the Fibonacci sequence. Incidentally, as well, going back to what we were saying about Michael Scott earlier, Fibonacci credits him with the development of the Fibonacci sequence. So this is how brilliant Michael Scott was, the Magi of Frederick II.
Wow. And
also, Charlemagne had two Magi, one named Scotus and one named Scott. So there's a distinct tradition of Scottish Magi influencing the royal courts of Europe. But the Mason-Dixon line, you see later, the Society of the Cincinnati, which kind of represented the Jacobite side of the argument in early America, creating Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Denver, and of course Cincinnati, Ohio. So this is a group that had even extensive intelligence service in Europe, operating with the Marquis de Lafayette and Pierre L'Enfant, who were both members of the Society of the Cincinnati. And this is kind of leading us to how I feel Edgar Allan Poe knew about the Devil's seat in Rennes-les-Bains. That's part of the Rennes-le-Château mystery. Mm-hmm. Because he mentions it in a devil's seat in one of his stories as part of one of the clues, and indeed the whole setting and description and reference to the skull in the tree is evocative of all the imagery of Mary Magdalene and that area of Rennes-le-Château. And when I looked into it, he was not supposed to have gone there during his life. But when I researched it, I found a letter that other authors had referred to from Alexander Dumas, the author of The Three Musketeers, that stated that Edgar Allan Poe stayed with him in Paris for an extended period prior to writing The Gold Bug in 1837. And it's really interesting because all of this is, Berenger Saunière, the priest at Rennes-le-Château, wasn't even born until 1857. So there's lots of information, even the Cassini family being involved, the premier astronomers of the day who helped to ground truth the Paris meridian, Francois Arago, who was directly associated with the Debati brothers, who are responsible for the Great Cross of Vendée. So there's this whole web of astronomers and people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin that were associated with these people when they did spend time in France. So It makes a lot of sense that Americans were aware of all of these secrets and even used them to their advantage in investigating royal interests that may be against the establishment of a republic in France.
Amazing stuff. Cort, I gotta ask you how your brain works. Do you look at these places on like a research perspective in terms of like Google Earth and structures, and then look at the history and understand and reveal more layers? Or is it a knowledge of the history and then you find structures? Or which way does your brain work? I gotta see how this works, bro.
That's hard to say. At first, when I first started to do it, I would just find structures that seemed to work this way. But after a while, when I started to, study the origins of the Tower of the Winds and how it worked and what it was for, what its function was, you could follow the philosophy through time. And you can see the royal entities becoming knowledgeable about this. And it's always been like that. Even land surveying, like in 19th century England, was dominated by the gentry, gentlemen's clubs and such.
Sure.
So if you just look at the structure and who built it, and you look at the places that it might point to, often you'll find one or two other places that may be associated with the same family as the person who built the other structure, or the same organization. And for instance, we see the Tower of the Winds at Shugborough Hall pointing to the Tower of the Winds at the Mount Stewart estate near Londonderry in Ireland.
Oh yeah, and that's where I'm coming from today. That's where I'm at right now.
They point to each other. Two reproductions of the Tower of the Winds.
Gotcha.
And then you have the King's Knot at Stirling Castle points to the star in the landscape of Rennes-le-Château, with the star pointing back, and the line crosses the Tower of the Winds at Shugborough Hall.
Wow.
So they're setting up a talismanic landscape similar to one of these linear parks, but on a much larger global scale.
Fascinating.
So yeah, it takes a little bit to understand. I note other people trying and not getting it, but after a while you'll use genealogy and the same characters, an organization like the Hudson's Bay or the Holy Roman Emperor. If you follow all those, they all did this. So it becomes obvious pretty quick.
It's the corroboration that keeps going past every layer. It's the facts corroborate each other, and then the philosophy is easier to understand when you get corroborating evidence, linemen's families and genealogies and philosophy. And here's the thing. I mean, you look at the ancient Babylonians and go back to these again. I mean, these are the guys who kickstarted this whole thing. I mean, these guys had town planning. It wasn't just a simple grid-line city for easy to walk around. Everything was astrologically aligned, or the temples were planned out with extreme precision, and they encoded their whole mathematics and philosophy into these structures.
Right, and even within their symbology, you can see that the Heaven's Gate symbol, it looks like a little snowflake, an octagonal representation of crossed lines. That means Heaven's Gate. And so that's where they were doing their astronomy from. The Heaven's Gate, and this whole concept's maybe got twisted around a little through the TV show Stargate.
Sure.
And plus there is a 19th century, at least, a belief that a lot of these axes did involve like time-based vortexes and things like that. So there is an occult belief and things like that associated with the more modern versions of what's going on in Girona and Rennes-le-Château.
Sure.
And if you even go back to Girona, Charlemagne's involved all in that too. So.
For sure. Cort, we're almost out of time. I know I only had you on for a quick hour today. We are going to get you back and do a proper full-length show. I guess, just tell people where we can give people the names of your books and where we can get a copy of them, and obviously give out your website as well, please.
Okay, the only book I'm marketing now is called The Sacred Towers of the Axis Mundi, and there's a link to it at my blog, survivalcell.blogspot.com. It's available on CreateSpace or Amazon. And my last book was called Axis Mundi, but I'm taking that down for sale because really in this new book I've updated and informed everybody a lot better about some of the subjects I covered in there, and I covered a little bit of the same ground. So I'm going to just sell the later book. But here, coming up soon, within just a month, no more than a month, I'll have another book that includes solutions to the Rennes Chateau mystery, the Octagons of Thomas Jefferson. It'll tell you all about what I hinted at about the International Peace Garden, and it'll document all of these German Norman families that seem to have kind of a hidden hand that people mistake more for England and Scotland because of Prince Rupert of the Rhine, who was English as well. He was a Stuart, Habsburg, and Anjou. Anjou.
For sure. Well, Cort, we're almost out of time. I think we just dropped Heather on the call, but not to worry. We are going to get you back on the show when the book's out, Cort, for sure, but I wish you maybe success for that. Fascinating.
Thanks, James.
Fascinating talking to you. Such a gracious soul, and glad you were providing this knowledge to the world. I just think it's incredibly mysterious and insightful, and you got a great perspective on the world, Cort, so I thank you for your time today.
Thanks, man. Back at you. I always enjoy what you have to say, too, James.
Oh, you take care, brother. Speak to you soon.
All right. Yeah, contact me anytime.